Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 117 of the USMB Lead Pods, and happy Thanksgiving. My name is Matt Ayersman, and as always, so glad to have you with me today for another new episode. So today we have the pleasure of speaking with Aaron Box, USMB's recently appointed National Director. And we kind of cover two main things today. So first of all, if you're listening around the time that we're releasing this, you likely just finished celebrating Thanksgiving. You might be listening on Black Friday. And in the US, at least, we have this kind of strange string of days where we have Thanksgiving and then Black Friday. I think they say it's Small Business Saturday. We've got Cyber Monday, all the way leading up to Giving Tuesday. So this week, giving and generosity and shopping and spending money is kind of in the air. People are thinking about it and talking about it. And so today, Aaron's going to walk us through Giving Tuesday, and he shares the kind of interesting origin story of how Giving Tuesday got started. And you probably know, if you've been around USMB for a while, that we often participate in Giving Tuesday, giving you a few options to support some really great ministry opportunities through USMB. So Aaron will walk us through what those funds will go towards this year. But beyond just giving money, Aaron also has some really great thoughts today on leadership and how to be a generous leader. Servant leadership has kind of become a popular buzzword in the past, a few decades or so. But being a generous, kind servant leader honestly really is the best form of leadership. And so Aaron walks us through that and how we can be generous leaders ourselves, what it looks like to be a generous church, how we can be a generous denomination, a network of churches. I know a lot of you listening are still kind of getting to know Aaron, and this is a great episode where you can kind of get to hear his heart for leadership and the kind of leader that he wants to be and that he wants us to be. So I think you'll feel encouraged. This is a good one. So once again, happy Thanksgiving to you. We'll take a quick break to hear from our sponsor for today, and then we'll get to Aaron Box talking about generous leadership.
Opportunities for generosity abound on Giving Tuesday, December 3rd. USMB would be grateful for your designated gift for church planting, leadership development, or immigrant ministries through CORD. Last year, donor support helped Redemption Church in Owatonna, Minnesota, make its church accessible for its older members, funded a record year of Leadership Pipeline internships, and helped Christian Center The Hand of God in Hamilton, Ohio, begin a building project through CORD. You can make a lasting impact through an investment in USMB. Visit www.usmb.org to give on Tuesday, December 3rd.
All right, my friends. Well, today I'm joined by none other than the Big Cheese, the Grand Poobah himself, National Director. Aaron Box is back on the podcast with us today. So, Aaron, great to have you back. Thanks for spending some time with us on the podcast. Great to have you with us.
Glad to be here, although I take issue with being called the Big Cheese.
Too bad. I'm going to make some new business cards for you. So,
right.
Well, Aaron, we've got a lot to cover. We've got quite a bit to go through today, but I just wanted to give you a chance. It's been a while since people have heard you, at least kind of publicly. I know you're several months in now. You're traveling all over the place, meeting with pastors and leaders. So how's it going? Do you have any updates for us? And how many sky miles do you have over the past few months?
That last question I won't answer, but I'll tell you, I believe this week I hit 50 flights in the last 4 months. So wow. I have been traveling quite a bit. To answer your question, it's going great. One of the fun things transitioning from the role of a local pastor into this role is getting to see the way God's at work in a number of different, churches and styles of churches around the country. I've gotten to be witnessed, I think, 40 something baptisms and
wow.
People, making decisions for Jesus and really cool things happening. So that's been great, and starting to connect dots between agencies and people so we can move forward together a little better. But it's been really fun just to meet pastors and leaders and go to churches. And I just came back from the Central District Conference, and that was a great time. So I'm still at the place of introducing myself to lots of people. So there's that fun of all those new connections and conversations.
Awesome. Whenever I get a chance to talk to you, Aaron, you are in between flights or meetings or something. I know you're very busy, so thanks for your hard work. It's appreciated. So we're grateful for your leadership. So
absolutely.
Okay, well today, like I said, we're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to start by as we're recording this, it's right before Thanksgiving. As people are listening, it's right after, and so there's all these crazy days, right? We've got Thanksgiving, but then Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and then someone decided we should be not greedy for at least one day. And all of a sudden, this Giving Tuesday thing was born. And so USMB has kind of participated in Giving Tuesday for a number of years, and it's the same thing this year. And so we want to talk about that a little bit, but I wanted to let you know, dear listeners, that this isn't going to be just a commercial the rest of the time. We've got kind of a deeper conversation about leadership that we'll get to in just a second that I'm excited to get there with Aaron. But first, Aaron, what would you like to share about Giving Tuesday? What do you know about the kind of the origins, and maybe as far as USMB's involvement, what would you like to share about Giving Tuesday?
Yeah, Giving Tuesday, it's actually kind of cool to know where it came from. And it was a response to, the consumerism and greed and all of that is wrapped up in people storming doors to get the, 3 computers that are on sale at Walmart and all the things that happened during, Black Friday. But it was actually started in New York City. It was a partnership, I believe, between a YMCA and the United Nations Foundation. It started in 2012. And one of the neat things about Giving Tuesday is, even though it went viral, there was a real intentional decision from the front end, like not to copyright anything. They really wanted to create a movement of giving. And so I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's a significant, massive amount of money that's been given through that campaign to untold nonprofits and, ministries like ourselves. And so it really has become something that people expect. It's part of the calendar, if you will, when Thanksgiving comes. One of the challenges is, because so many people are part of it, it's also diluted a little bit. We're certainly not the only ones probably that your listeners are connected to who are doing a Giving Tuesday campaign. But I love that history, that it was really this grassroots desire to just help people be generous. And even the way it was created, the fact that it was so open-handed to help other organizations is really a neat background.
Yeah, it's so easy to get sucked into the consumerism vortex this time of year. So it's a nice antidote to that. So I mentioned that USMB has been kind of highlighting this in the last few years, and we've been participating, and a lot of our people out of our churches have given very generously. Again, we're going to do that again this year. So can you just share, Aaron, what if people give to USMB on Giving Tuesday, what kinds of things are they going to be supporting?
Yeah, it's a great question. And certainly I would encourage people to give to the USMB on Giving Tuesday. But all of that money that comes in fact, the people who give will have an opportunity to direct those funds. 3 options. You can support Cord, which is our partnership with immigrant and I would call almost emerging churches. You can support church planting. Last year, some of those funds that came in were used to do some improvements at one of our younger church plants. And the third option is to support leadership development. One of the fun successes last year is that our leadership pipeline that matches interns with churches grew by, I believe, about 350%. So we need those funds to be able to fund those internships. And as I said, if you give on Giving Tuesday to the USMB, you can actually direct which of those 3 or all 3, I believe, if you want, where those funds go.
Awesome. So usmb.org, I'm sure the links will be everywhere. If you follow us, USMB on social media, I'm sure there'll be links anywhere.
Indeed. And one of the ways people can help us out always is, share it, like it, tell your friends about it. If you're a leader in a church, certainly we'd love for you to share it with your congregation and encourage them to give. It's all word of mouth.
Yeah. Well, those are 3 very worthy programs, and I know that a lot of our churches are benefiting directly from them. So yeah, that's great. Let's support them and be generous. That's a great thing. So before we transition, anything else on Giving Tuesday?
I think, I'd encourage people to make that a part of their family calendar. I have friends that don't just give money, they intentionally volunteer on that Tuesday. There's people who create their own little mini fundraisers, towards a missionary or something like that. And I really would encourage folks just to make this, particularly if you have kids at home, to make this a family tradition that together you're being generous on this day every year.
Yeah, very cool. I love it. That's a great idea. So now if we kind of switch gears a little bit, so on Lead Pods, obviously, a lot of times we do share news about USMB family, about churches and missionaries and pastors. That's a big part of what we do. But we also want to be really intentional about leadership development. And speaking of leadership development, that's one thing that we try to do here. And so, Aaron, you had some good and kind of interesting thoughts, I think, on how giving and generosity plays into leadership, right? So can you just How did those things connect in your mind, and what was the kind of transition between Giving Tuesday to talking about leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. In my mind, generosity and leadership go hand in hand. At least healthy leadership. Leadership is if you think about generously leading generously, what's the alternative, right? It's probably not a healthy thing for the people you're leading.
Yeah.
And so as we talked about Giving Tuesday in general, it just seemed like a good opportunity to talk about this idea of leading generously, which on the face, talk about the role of generosity in leadership almost sounds like an absurd question, because everybody would say, well, of course you should be generous in your leadership. But if we unpack that a little bit, I think it might be helpful for people. So I would love to start just by talking about how we define leadership. And I would actually, those of you listening, hit the pause button in a second here and take a minute to just jot down, how would you define what it means to be a leader? How would you define leadership? There are a number of different, very popular definitions out there. And the thing is, whether you realize it consciously or not, the way you define leadership inevitably determines what your goals are as a leader. And I'll just give you a couple examples of sort of the popular definitions out there. A lot of these come from the business world, but they're also applied very much in the church ministry world through things like leadership summits, and things like that. One of the most well-known definitions comes from John Maxwell, and he's famous for saying that leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. And so you have this definition of leadership as influencing people, which, by the way, he came up with that phrase, but it wasn't really a new idea. You can look at Harry Truman. He defines a leader as somebody who can persuade people to do what they want to do or not want to do and make them like it. It's something along the lines of that. There's some other people from quite a while back, and even the U.S. Air Force uses a definition of leadership that talks about influencing and directing people to win their obedience, confidence, and respect. A little different than maybe what we want in the church. But that idea of leadership is influence. The goal that Maxwell actually says out loud is that the goal of a leader is to increase their influence. And as a pastor, I would argue, or even a business person, if you're a business person listening to this, that's a really self-serving goal. And inevitably, if that's how you define leadership, you're going to end up at some pretty unhealthy places, I would say. Some of the alternatives that are out there defining leadership as vision or leadership as motivation, leadership as empowering others. The challenge with that one, I actually like that definition, except that when you drill down into the people who've written on that, a lot of it deals with sort of social ideologies that get problematic after a while. It's a little deeper than just empowering people. The definition, I think, falls closely to maybe more closely to Scripture. Actually, I'll rephrase that. The definition that I think is in line with Scripture compared to all the other ones is the idea of defining leadership as service, or the leader as servant. And I bring this up to say that idea of leadership as a servant really comes back to generosity. That language of servant is problematic for some folks, not just because of past slavery and things like that, but it is confusing to talk about a leader as also a servant sometimes. The focus of servant leadership is to put the needs of your people you lead and your team and your organization before yourself. And inevitably, that is a generous action, right? It's a generous kind of leadership. And the nature of being a servant, I can think of a number of places in Scripture. The one that comes to mind first, though, is Matthew 20, when Jesus, tells his disciples, look at the way the people around you are leading. They lord it over people. And he says, not so with you. If you want to be first, you should be last. And he uses himself as the example when he says, even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And so certainly that's a posture for leading. But the question is, what does it look like to do that? What does it look like to lead generously, to lead in a way that truly serves and betters the people around you? And, that's where I think the word generosity is helpful, because we get an idea of what that looks like pretty naturally. Giving yourself to people. The empowering is one of those words that comes up in that too, I think. But no, to unpack, what does it look like to lead generously, if that's the definition we're going to work from? Robert Greenleaf is probably one of my favorite writers on leadership. If you read Servant Leadership from him, it is not the easiest to read. It's rather academic. It comes out of the 70s. But he's he is the person that coined this phrase and made it popular as a leadership model for, any type of organization, be it a school or a business or government. But he talks about things like intentionally listening to what people are saying, making time and space for the people you lead for them to actually be heard by you, awareness of just knowing the people you lead. It's amazing how many leaders don't take time to really know the people that they're leading. And that happens in churches too, right? To know what's actually going on in somebody's family, to know what they're struggling with, to know where their strengths are. Persuasion is certainly a part of that, because sometimes people have to be persuaded to do things that are good for them or good for the organization. But you can do that in a way that isn't strong-arming, right? You can do that in a way that's almost more invitation than it is compelling somebody to something. One of the interesting things that Greenleaf talks about is the idea of foresight. And I say it's interesting because his definition of that is the ability to look at the past, because we think foresight, you don't think forward, but to look at the past and learn lessons from the past, the ability to recognize what's the reality in the present and put those two together to see what is out ahead that you should be planning for and helping people towards. I love that idea. But it's an idea of creating space for others to grow and to be developed. And pastorally, I think of things like, being generous in recognition and praise. One of the things that I was taught a long time ago is when you give compliments, try to be specific. People actually see that you recognize not just, hey, you're doing a great job, but hey, I really appreciate you did this at this time in this place. That means a lot more, right? And it means you're paying attention. I think there's also a reality that, particularly in our MB world, where it's easy for our peacekeeping to be almost passive aggressive, right? Like we're just trying to address things. I think correction can be a really generous thing where you lovingly point out something that needs to change. And if you have trust with people, that can be a really powerful thing. I've experienced that in my own life where people have said pretty direct things to me about what needs to change. And I look back and I appreciate that deeply versus if somebody wouldn't have told me. Often we have these blind spots that maybe it's uncomfortable to talk about, right? So I think that's part of being generous as a leader. There's a couple other things I would just say. One, these are true to the business world and also, unfortunately, to the pastoral world. It's really easy to want to protect your knowledge. Like, certainly in a business, special information you protect is trade secrets and things like that. But as individuals, it's really easy to want to not share the reason we're good at something because somebody else might end up being better than us, right? Certainly people who lead. And in the ministry world, there's been, unfortunately, in the last decade or so, this idea of creating your personal brand or platform, right? And if you look at that idea of creating a platform or a brand, what you often see is leaders who position themselves as the expert, but they don't necessarily really give you the truth of who they are and how they got to be there. And they give you the pieces that are going to keep you coming back. And so, for pastors, for leaders to share with the people they lead, hey, this is how I do what I do. In the church, one of my favorite things I've seen is pastors who will do a small group around writing their sermons and actually involve people in their church, leaders or not, in let them under the hood to see what it looks like to write a sermon. A really helpful thing if you want to develop teachers, right? It's astonishing how rare that is, actually, that type of thing happens. So sharing knowledge, and I think the other piece is just sharing leadership. Leaders, unfortunately, like to protect control and like to protect the ability to know that it's going to be the way we want it to be. And, again, in the church, making space for other people to be in the pulpit. That, by the way, that's a declining reality. It's interesting. A number of pastors have kind of become protective of that space. And there's reasons for that. But if you're leading people, certainly if you have interns or lay leaders that you're trying to develop, you've got to have some space where you're sharing leadership opportunities for them, whether it's speaking, whether it's being the board chair or heading a ministry team or whatever, to be generous and just creating those opportunities for people. I think those are all part of what it looks like to lead in a generous way.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, a lot of things are kind of circling around my brain. One thing I'm thinking, Aaron, is like this kind of leader, like a servant leader. I think for the followers, this is probably by far the best kind of leadership if you're in the follower role, right? If you're following someone who's a leader, this is the kind of person that you want. But as I think about the world around us, especially outside the church, like I can't think of very many examples of successful leaders in our world today who actually model this very well. Like most leaders who get most of the airtime and news and culture aren't really doing this, right? A lot of them seem to be out for power or selfish ambition or whatever the case may be. So I think you're right that servant leadership is by far, I think it's the best model, the most effective, especially for the followers. But why hasn't it grown more? Like, because I think a lot of people become the leaders they see, right? Or whether we mean to or not, we kind of model the people that we see in leadership positions. Why hasn't this caught on in culture in general?
Yeah, first of all, I'd say there are actually some pretty great examples out there.
Okay.
Both as individual leaders and as organizations. I think of Patagonia as a company that really was out ahead of their time. They started this idea of 1% for the planet, of companies giving back a percentage of what they make towards things outside of themselves. However you feel about the politics of that, they have really put their money where their mouth is. If you dive deep into their business philosophy, they've led the way in making sure that factory workers are paid fair wages and in safe environments and things like that. And so I think there are examples out there where, and even in the structure of their company and the way they treat their workers, there's so much opportunity for growth. And so I think there's examples out there. But to answer your question, why we don't see more of it, in the business world, unfortunately, everything's driven by profit, right?
Yeah.
And I think often we're short-sighted in thinking that the quickest way to be efficient is to misuse people, and the quickest way to get where you want to is exerting power. And the other thing I'd say is, for whatever reason, we seem to really like to gravitate towards unhealthy leaders and unhealthy leadership models. You can go all the way back to the Old Testament when Israel wants a king, right? They have the God of the universe leading them, but they want to look like the other nations and they want to have a king. And we just seem so prone to want to follow people who are leading in a damaging way. You see that in every facet of our world right now, be it politics, be it business, the church. Certainly there are no shortage of examples of church scandals where power has been misused and abused. And that can only happen in a context where it's being allowed to happen. Many of these places where power is abused, you see other things that are larger issues, like sort of the ends justify the means thinking and the way you approach ministry. So, I think in our fallenness, we're prone to want something that's not good for us.
Yeah.
Is maybe the shortest way to answer that question.
No, I think you're right. I think when we think of leadership, whether we say it verbally or not, like power and influence are in there, right? Like people who are good leaders have that. And I think some people are hesitant to be, focus on the quote unquote soft skills, even though that is what makes a good leader. We kind of elevate the things that on the outside but come across as strong or powerful. So for people who are, whether they're currently kind of in a leadership role or if we're talking to kind of emerging leaders, how can we kind of turn the tide on that? How can we make this something that is more common in our culture? Do you have any ideas how we can spread this?
Yeah, I think certainly if you're a follower of Christ, maybe spending some time in Matthew 20, John 13, where Jesus is washing his disciples' feet, and then says that, the mark, what's going to cause people to know we're actually followers of Jesus is that we love people the way that he just exampled. 1 Peter 5 is also another great passage talking about elders, how they're not supposed to lead because they have to, but because they want to. And It's not for shameful gain. It's not for domineering over people. Kind of lays out this blueprint for this very idea. So I think one of the challenges is for leaders in the church, particularly, and if you're a Christian in the business world, to just stop and ask, like, who have I listened to to define this for me? And is the definition that I'm pursuing at all in line with the life that Jesus has called me to? That's a difficult thing to confront for some folks, because you may even be in a position where you're being told to lead or required to lead in a way that you would go, oh man, I'm not sure this is healthy and the best way to do this. So how do you affect change? I think in a lot of ways you can take very simple action to change this. Maybe it's starting with just a number of questions that you set for yourself to make sure that you're caring for the people you lead. Maybe it's just making sure, like, do I know the names of the kids that my employees have at home? Do I know the name of their spouse? Now, if you're leading 200 people, you're not going to know all of that, right? But at least the people closest to you, do you know what they're struggling with? Do you know what they're worried about? Do you know what to celebrate with them? There's some pretty easy places to start there of just asking questions.
Yeah. And to me, this is another example. There's so many of these where if you follow the life that Jesus laid out for us, it's going to work. Most of the time, the way that Jesus taught us to live, even if you don't think Jesus is who he says he is, it's just the best way to live. Like the Christian life is full of examples of this, where if you live how Jesus lived, you're going to live a better life. If you follow Jesus, you're going to be a good leader, because he was a good leader and he had a lot of great things that we can learn from. So I think that this is just kind of exhibit A of that in my mind.
Yeah, the challenge is A, that takes faith, right? And B, yeah, it works for you, but you may not make as much money.
Right.
May not advance the way you hoped to. You may need to look at your own goals and what it is you're trying to pursue and prioritizing. Because the model of following Jesus probably isn't gonna, increase your net worth necessarily.
Right.
Not in dollars, but certainly it'll make your life richer and allow you to actually have kingdom impact on the people around you.
Yeah. So far you've mentioned getting to know your employees' families. I think that's a great kind of practical tip. You talked about maybe not holding onto the pulpit too tightly and sharing the wealth and developing leaders. What are some other ways that if pastors or church leaders are listening, what are some other kind of practical ways that we can really be this kind of leader in our kind of day-to-day church life?
Yeah, I think, man, there's so many creative examples out there, but certainly since we're on, Giving Tuesday as part of the focus, talk about, finances. I have a friend that started these generosity groups. I love this idea. Get 10 people together and you cooperatively find a person or a cause that, needs some assistance, and you commit together to raise some funds. And then you do a project together or give those funds out together, and you get to celebrate what happens together. I think to start something like that as an example of, leading in this way, it's because you're inviting other people to be generous with you, right? But you're leading by example. Now, there are all sorts of pitfalls with something like that can come in. Do we all get the same amount of money? That somebody going to show off by putting an extra zero on a check or something, and people can figure that out. But I think those places where you can, volunteering is the same way. I would encourage leaders. A lot of organizations will give paid time for volunteering. It's fascinating. Very few of those leaders will go volunteer with their people. So, be the lead volunteer, and don't show up for the photo op. Show up to actually, roll your sleeves up and work along the people you're with. There's some simple things that you can do. It's just a matter of prioritizing that value of serving and being generous. And I think part of leading is to be an example on those things for the people you lead. Doesn't necessarily, I hope it doesn't mean you get the big giant foam check to show off how much you gave away, but making sure that you're being generous and that it's a practice that's consistent. And then, just looking for ways to invite people into that with you.
I keep seeing pictures of those giant checks, and sometimes the checks are for like $100. And it's like a Michael Scott thing where you're spending more money on the check than you are on the donation, which is just kind of gross. But one more, shifting gears a little bit, Aaron. So we've talked a lot about a lot of this is kind of about like individual leaders, right? Like it's individual leaders being servant minded and generous in their leadership. What about like churches or groups as a whole? Like how can a church be a generous church, or how can USMB be a generous network, or how can a district do this? Can we do this on kind of a larger scale?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a starting point, what I see in a lot of churches, even in their operating budget, a starting point will be, we're going to tithe 10% to missions work or, work outside of our church, placing some of those values in how you budget. One of the things I think we overlook oftentimes is that a budget really should be a vision document and should show what's important. Obviously there are things in there you just have to pay for. It's not like we have high value for the electric company, but we do like to have the lights on. And so maybe recognizing that fact and looking at how can our budget not be manipulated to look away, but how can we budget our funds in a way that we're operating generously as an organization. One of the things that we did at North Park was almost every one of our service projects we did in the community, and I'm sure some people push back on this and it's not right for everybody, but it was not a North Park thing. We did not brand it as North Park doing this. We often were highlighting other businesses who were involved and kind of putting them before ourselves, or we would just call it a neighborhood thing. And we would also position our service projects in a way that we weren't going as the people with resources to serve the people who didn't have resources. But rather we were seeking other partners to work alongside us so that together we could share our resources. Yeah. And, we found tremendous positive outcomes by inviting people who didn't know Jesus into things that, are essentially in the heart of Jesus, and allowing them to serve alongside us and leading in that way, leading a whole group of people to value feeding kids in your neighborhood or whatever it is in your community. I think you can shift your approach to things like service projects to where your organization can have greater impact, both by being generous, but also by not doing it as a marketing tool. It's crass, but we do sometimes. And by inviting people into the process with you. And trusting for, opportunities to share the gospel in that.
One thing that I think is kind of tricky is I've been in like church or nonprofit world pretty much all my career. You have for a lot of years as well. And I think it's probably easier for you and I to model this in our roles than I think it might be for someone who's in a kind of a high level exec job. So if someone listening is in a role where leading this way would be totally countercultural to what is expected of them, I think you even mentioned like some people may be instructed to lead in a way that's counter to this, right? So again, in some ways, I think we've got it kind of easy because this is kind of expected of pastors. But if someone is in a role where that's really not the norm and it might actually be discouraged, what would you say to a leader in that position?
I would say, leadership is going to be a lot more enjoyable if you're serving other people. So many leaders get isolated through, we could talk a long time about why some of that's the hierarchy structure. And, it's that idea of it's lonely at the top is very real. You can be incredibly isolated as a leader. Yeah. And one of the things you can do to combat that is just actually get to know the people you're leading and care about them and be generous towards them. That's the first thing I would say is I think you'll enjoy leading more.
Yeah.
Second piece is just believe that if you care for people and you invest in them and they know you care for them and they trust that you care for them, they're probably going to run through a wall for you. Probably going to have people working for you who you don't need to ask to go the extra mile, right? Because they're now feeling cared for and bought in. And so again, I think in any, whether you're a government leader, medical field, whatever organization you're in, I think even very large, complex organizations, this can be beneficial to the organization, especially around things like employee retention, and the church that would be volunteer retention, right? But also, creating those bonds and culture. I think we're starting to realize in the business world that culture really matters. That you can have two companies that have equal resources and equal, market access, but because they have different cultures, one will be greatly successful over the other. And so this can affect your culture and yeah, just the productivity and engagement level of your employees. So
Yeah. So I guess one thing that we've talked a little bit about, and we've already kind of hinted at this throughout, but I guess what is the alternatives, or what are some of the risks if we don't live out this way?
I would just encourage anybody in leadership to really look in the mirror and am I prioritizing serving people? Is my priority serving the people around me, or am I so driven by expectations or my own desires that I'm making those more important? At the end of the day, the alternative to serving generously is to serve selfishly and to be self-serving. And so it's a question I still put in front of myself on a regular basis is, how am I doing at caring for the people that I'm charged with leading? And so, yeah, that translates to just about anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the alternative isn't pretty. And I think there's a hard reality here that for many folks, being honest about where they're at might be painful. And that includes people who are senior pastors and lead pastors, right? This isn't, the church isn't immune to this by any means. And that desire within us to get ahead, to get the things we want, to get more, to get respect, to look successful, those can do really weird things to the way we actually carry out our leadership. And so we should be aware of that. We should be aware of where our heart is. And yeah, it's an intentional choice you can make every day of, and wherever you're at, you can increase in this incrementally, right? Like every day to just look for an opportunity to serve somebody that you're leading, to serve your team, to serve your organization. Yeah.
No, that's good. Yeah, I'm glad earlier you brought up Patagonia, because there's a lot of other organizations that do model this well. And it's true that it's still rare. Like I would still say it's definitely not a majority of people who model this behavior. So I think if we as Christian leaders, as Christ followers, as pastors or whoever can be known for living this way, we're going to be different, right? We're going to stand out as not what the rest of the world is doing. And I think leading this way is very attractive. So if we can model the leadership of Jesus and the way that we live, only good things will come out of that, I think. So
yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I hope listeners grab that sort of generosity framework to think through their own leadership and how am I being generous through my leadership?
Yeah, that's a really great framework. Good question to ask. Okay, well, Aaron, we'll start to wrap up here. So speaking of generous, we'll kind of wrap it up. Giving Tuesday is around the corner. We encourage you to be generous, support our ministries. We love your help. But beyond that, yeah, I think you would say more than your money, we want you to be generous people, right? So do you have any kind of closing thoughts as we wrap up here?
I don't know that I could be in an interview without asking people to personally commit to making disciples, which is in line with this, right? This is giving yourself away as you follow Jesus. And so, everything we do, whether it's church planting, leadership development, all the things that the USMB is involved in and your local church is striving towards, comes back to, our success in them is determined by our willingness to make disciples on an individual level. Yeah. And so regardless of whether you have a title in your church or not, I would just really encourage people to think about who, praying for a name or two for this coming year of who's somebody that I can invite to walk with me as a follower of Jesus. And what a great, maybe that can be something we make its own day for within the USMB is commitment to disciple somebody, because at the end of the day, that's our mandate as a church. That's our commissioning. And so it goes hand in hand with living generously, because it's caring about somebody enough to walk with them, to teach them to be obedient to what Christ has taught us.
That's good. Maybe that can be the Wednesday, right? We've got small business Saturday. We got all these days. So let's discipleship Wednesday. Let's make it a thing. You heard it here first. So by the URL, somebody. Well, Aaron, thanks again for your leadership, man. Again, I'm still getting to know you, but I appreciate your leadership, and I think you modeled this well to us. So thank you for your time today and all you do for USMB World. We appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure and my honor to serve in this capacity. So.
The Bi-Monthly Christian Leader is the magazine of the U.S. Mennonite Brethren and is free to anyone attending a Mennonite Brethren church. The Christian Leader shares themed feature articles, news, columns, and stories from MB churches. It's your point of connection to other members of USMB. If you attend an MB church, we want you to have the Christian Leader in your hands. Visit ChristianLeaderMag.com to sign up for your free subscription.
Once again, Aaron, thanks for your time today and for leading us here in the USMB family. Lots of good stuff there from Aaron that I'm still kind of thinking about, and I like the idea that really generosity and leadership should go hand in hand. And this is kind of one of those things that makes sense when you say it out loud, but I'd never thought about it before. How you define leadership really determines what your goals are as a leader. I think that's true, and I really like that idea from Aaron as well. So once again, leading up to Giving Tuesday, we would of course love your support. If you're able to give and chip in a little bit to help these great initiatives, we would love for you to do that. You can head over to usmb.org, and there's a link right at the top if you would like to contribute financially. Or of course, you can help us spread the word in your churches or on social media or however you choose to do that. That's really good. That's really important. But again, as we said in the episode, I just hope we all increasingly work on being these kind of leaders. Let's be generous people, both financially and in the way that we treat others. I think this is just so important. I think in general, the MBs tend to do this pretty well, but we all also have room for improvement, of course. So I hope we can continue to work on our leadership development together. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. So once again, thank you so much for listening today. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope this week has been a really good and special time for you with your friends and family. And as we turn the page to December, I'll look forward to seeing you again next time right here on Lead Pods.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.